Italy, the country best known for their immense empire spanning from the westernmost point of mainland Europe to the Caucasus mountain range. Let's dive into it. The Nuragic civilization, born in Sardinia and southern Corsica, where is it called the Taurian civilization. The Nurag civilization lasted from the 18th century BC to the 2nd century AD. They got their name from the characteristic Nuragic towers, which evolved from the pre-existing megalithic culture. More than 7,000 of these Nurogs appear in Sardinia. The Nurogs had no written records, apart from a possible few epigraphic documents. The only written information comes from the classical literature of the Greeks and Romans, and this might be considered more mythological than historical, although researchers suggest that around the 8th century BC, the Nuragic populations may have adopted an alphabet similar to that used in Euboea. Although researchers suggest that around the 8th century BC, the Nuragic populations may have used similar to that used in Euboea, the Etruscan civilization. The Etruscans became widespread in central Italy after 800 BC. The main hypothesis of their origin of the Etruscans is that they are indigenous, probably stemming from Villanovan culture, or that they are an invasion from North or the Near East. Researchers says that the Etruscans spoke a non-Indo-European language. Some inscriptions in a similar language, Lemnian, have been found on the Aegean island of Lemnos. These are some Greek settlements. The Etruscan expansion was focused across the Apennines, and the political structure of the Etruscan culture was similar, albeit more aristocratic, to Magna Graecia in the south. The mining and commerce of metal, especially copper and iron, led to an enrichment of the Etruscans and to the expansion of their influence in the Italian peninsula and western Mediterranean. Especially in the 6th century BC, when the Phoenicians of Italy founded colonies along the coast of France, Catalonia, and Corsica. This led to the Etruscans to ally themselves with the Carthaginians. In 540 BC, the Battle of Alalia led to the new distribution of power in Mediterranean. Carthage now expanded its borders and sphere of influence at the expense of the Greeks, and the Etruscans saw themselves related to Corsica. The new international political system meant the beginning of the Etruscan decline. In 480 BC, Etruria's ally, Carthage, was defeated by a coalition of Magna Graecia, Grecian cities led by Syracuse. A few years later, in 474 BC, Syracuse defeated the Etruscans at the Battle of Cumae. Etruria's influence over the cities of Latinum and Campania weakened, and it was taken over by the Romans and Samnites in the 4th century. Etruria saw a Galaic invasion and its end of influence over the Po Valley and the Adriatic coast. Meanwhile, Rome had started annexing Etruscan cities. This led to the loss of the northern provinces. Etruria's influence over the cities of Latinum and Campania were weakened, and it was taken over by the Romans and Samnites in the 4th century, and Etruria was assimilated by Rome in 500 BC. Now on to the Roman kingdom. Not much is known about oh my god, dude. Again. Not much is known about Rome and how it was created. All that we have is myths and urban legends, but according to the founding myth of Rome, the city was founded on April 21st, 753 BC by the twin brothers Romulus and Remus. The traditional account of Roman history, which has come down through Livy and others, is that Rome's first centuries, it was ruled by a succession of 7 kings. The Gauls destroyed much of Rome's historical records when they sacked the city after the Battle of Allia in 387 AD. Basic fucking shit. After the Battle of Allia in 387 BC. Now we have the Roman Republic. According to the tradition and later writers such as Livy, the Roman Republic was established in 509 BC when the last of the 7 kings of Rome by Lucius Junius Brutus. A system based on annually elected magistrates and various representatives was established. A constitution set a series of checks and balances and a separation of powers. The most important magistrates were the 2 consuls, who together exercised executive authority as imperium, or military command. The consuls had to work with the Senate which was initially an advisory council of the ranking nobility or patricians, but grew in size and power. In the 4th century BC, the Republic came under attack by the Gauls, who initially prevailed and sacked Rome, but the Romans then drove the Gauls back. Led by Camillus, the Romans gradually subbed over the peoples of the peninsula, and the last threat to the Roman hegemony in Italy came when Tarentum, a major Greek colony, enlisted aid of Pyrrhus in Epirus in 281 BC, but this effort failed. In the 3rd century BC, Rome had to face a new and formidable opponent, Carthage, in the 3 Punic Wars. Now, okay, before I continue, I would like to tell you all that Oversimplified has made videos about the Punic Wars, and I highly encourage you to go watch. Let's go back to my video. Carthage was eventually destroyed by Rome and gained control over Hispania, Sicily, and North Africa. After defeating the Macedonian and Seleucid empires in the 2nd century BC, the Romans became the dominant people of the Mediterranean. The conquest of the Hellenistic kingdoms provoked a fusion between Roman and Greek cultures. The Roman elite, once ruled, became a luxurious and cosmopolitan one. By this time, Rome was a consolidated empire in the military view and had no major enemy. Armies occupied Spain in the 2nd century BC, encountered stiff resistance. The Celtiberian stronghold of Numidia became the center of Spanish resistance in the 140s and 130s BC. Numidia fell and was razed to the ground in 133 BC. In 105 BC, the Celtiberians drove the Cimbri and Teutons from southern Spain, though these had crushed Roman arms in southern Gaul, inflicting 80,000 casualties on the Roman army. The conquest of Hispania was completed in 19 BC, but at a heavy cost. In the 1st century BC, the Republic faced a period of political crisis and social unrest. Julius Caesar reconciliated the 2 powerful men of Rome, Marcus Linius Crassus and Pompey, in 53 BC. The triumvirate disintegrated at the death of Crassus. After being victorious in the Gallic Wars, Caesar crossed the Rubicon and invaded Rome in 49 BC, rapidly defeating Pompey. Caesar was eventually granted dictatorship for perpetuity and was murdered in 44 BC. Caesar's assassination caused political and social turmoil. Without the dictator's leadership, Rome was ruled by his friend and colleague, Mark Antony Octavian, Caesar's adopted son. Along with Antony and Marcus, Iemulus Lepidus established the second triumvirate. Lepidus was forced to retire in 36 BC after betraying Octavian in Sicily. Antony settled in Egypt with his lover, Cleopatra VIII, which was seen as an act of treason. Octavian's leadership brought the zenith of the Roman civilization, which lasted for 4 decades. His adoption of the name Augustus in 27 is usually taken by historians as the beginning of the Roman Empire. Officially, the government was republican, but Augustus assumed absolute powers. The Senate granted Octavian a unique grade of proconsular imperium, which gave him authority over all proconsuls, or military governor. The unruly imperial provinces at the borders were the vast majority of legions. The unruly imperial provinces at the borders were the vast majority of the legions were stationed, where under the control of Augustus, the peaceful senatorial provinces were under control of the Senate, the Roman legions, which had the unprecedented number, around 50. Because of the civil wars, they were reduced to 28. As the provinces were being established throughout the Mediterranean, Roman Italy maintained a special status, which made it Domina Provincicarium, or ruler of the provinces, and especially in the relation to the 1st century of the imperial stability, Retrix Mundi, or governor of the world, and Hominum Terram Parens, parent of all lands. Italy, such as a status meant within Italy. In times of peace, Roman magistrates exercised the Imperium Domi police power as an alternative to the Imperium Militare, means imperial military. Italy's inhabitants had Latin rights as well as religious and financial privileges. Despite its military strength, the empire made few efforts to expand, the most notable being the conquest of Britain, begun by Emperor Claudius in 47, and Emperor Trajan's of Dacia 101 to 102 and 105 to 106. In the first and second centuries, Roman legions were employed in the interment warfare with the Germanic tribes to the north of the Parthian Empire to the east, armed with insurrections, example the Harbanic insurrection in Judea in 70 and the brief civil wars, example in 68, the year of the four emperors, demanded the legions attention. The 70 years of Jewish-Roman wars was the second half of the first century, and the first half of the second century were exceptional in their duration and violence. An estimated 1.3 million Jews were killed as a result of the first Jewish revolt. The second Jewish revolt led to the death of over 200,000 Jews, and the third resulted in nearly 600,000 deaths of Jewish soldiers. After 395, the death of Theodos I, the empire was divided into an Eastern and Western Roman Empire. The western part faced increasing economic and political crisis and the frequent barbarian invasions, so the capital was moved from Mediolanum to Ravenna in 476. The Western Roman Emperor Romulus Augustulus was deposed by Odoacer. Odoacer's rule ended with the Ostrogoths under the leadership of Theodoric. Conquered Italy. Decades later, the armies of Eastern Emperor Justinian entered Italy with the goal of reestablishing imperial Roman rule, which led to the Gothic War that lasted between the 12th and 14th centuries. Italy diverged from the feudal structures of Northern Europe by developing oligarchic city-states such as Venice, Florence, and Genoa, which thrived through commerce and banking. These city-states, often governed as merchant republics, maintained independence from church and imperial control, fostering political freedom and economic innovation. The maritime republics, particularly Venice and Genoa, dominated the Mediterranean trade and played key roles in the Crusades, while northern Italy prospered. Central and southern regions remained poorer, with Rome in decline and the Papal States weakly governed. The Black Death in 1348 further devastated the population. Now, the Renaissance. The Renaissance is a difficult topic to explain, but it was a profound cultural, artistic, and intellectual revival that marked a rebirth of interest in classical knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome, leading to advancements in art, science, literature, and philosophy. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo revolutionized visual art with techniques such as linear perspective and naturalism. Humanism is a key and intellectual movement, emphasized by the value of human experience and individual potential, fostering innovations in education, political thought, and ethics. The Renaissance also saw the innovation of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg, which democratized knowledge. By the 18th century, with the War of the Spanish Succession, was triggered by the death without issue of the last Habsburg king of Spain, Charles II, who fixed the Spanish inheritance on Philip, Duke of Anjou, and the grandson of King Louis XV of France. In face of the threat of French hegemony over much of Europe, a grand alliance between Austria, England, and the Dutch Republic and other minor powers, including the Duchy of Savoy, was signed in The Hague. The alliance successfully fought and defeated the Franco-Spanish Party of the Two Crowns, and the subsequent Treaty of Utrecht and Rastatt passed control of much of Italy, Milan, Naples, and Sardinia, from Spain to Austria, while Sicily was ceded to the Duchy of Savoy. Spain attempted to retake the territories in Italy to claim the French throne in the War of the Quadruple Alliance from 1718 to 1720, but again was defeated. As a result of the Treaty of The Hague, Spain agreed to abandon its Italian claims while Duke Victor Amadeus II of Savoy agreed to exchange Sicily with Austria for the island of Sardinia, after which he was known as the King of Sardinia. The Spaniards regained Naples and Sicily following the Battle of Bitonto in 1738. Corsica passed from the Republic of Genoa to France in 1769 after the Treaty of Versailles. And then came Napoleon in 1796. With the help of the French army, Italy became under control with the aims of forcing the First Coalition to abandon Sardinia and forcing Austria to withdraw from Italy. Within only 2 weeks, Victor Amadeus III of Sardinia was forced to sign an armistice. Napoleon entered Milan, where he was welcomed as a liberator, subsequently beating off Austrian counterattacks and continuing to advance. He arrived in Veneto in 1797. Here occurred the Veronese Easters, an act of rebellion against the French oppression that tied down Napoleon for about a week. Napoleon conquered most of Italy in 1797 and 99, after which he set up a series of new republics, complete with new codes of law and an abolition of new feudal privileges. Napoleon's Cisalpine Republic was centered on Milan. Genoa, the city, became a republic, while its hinterland became the Ligurian Republic. The Neapolitan Republic was formed around Naples, but it lasted only 5 months, and the coalition captured it in 1805. He formed the Kingdom of Italy, with himself as king and his stepson as viceroy. Now we're on to the unification of Italy. The Risorgimento was the political and social process that unified different states of the Italian peninsula. It is difficult to pin down the exact dates for the beginning and end of the Italian reunification, but most scholars agree that it began the end of Napoleonic rule and the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and approximately ended with the Franco-Prussian War in 1871. Though the last Città Irredente did not join the Italian victory in World War I. In 1820, Spaniards successfully revolted over disputes about their constitution, which influenced the development of a similar movement in Italy. A regiment in the army of the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, commanded by Guillermo Pepe, conquering the peninsular part of the Two Sicilies. The King, Ferdinand I, agreed to enact a new constitution. The revolutionaries, though, failed to court popular support and fell to Austrian troops of the Holy Alliance. Ferdinand abolished the constitution and began systematically persecuting revolutionaries, many of whom were forced into exile. The leader of the 1821 revolutionary movement in Piedmont was Santore di Santarossa, who wanted to remove the Austrians and unify Italy under the House of Savoy. The Piedmont revolt started in Alessandria. The king's regent, Prince Charles Albert, acting while the King Charles Felix was away, approved a new constitution to appease the revolutionaries, but then the king returned, disavowed the constitution, and requested assistance from the Holy Alliance. De Santa Rosa's troops were defeated. The would-be Piedmontese revolutionary fled to Paris. Artistic and literary sentiment also turned towards nationalism. Italy became a nation-state on March 17, 1861, when most of the peninsula were united under King Victor Emmanuel II. The architects of Italian unification were Camillo Benso, Count of Cavour, and Giuseppe Garibaldi. In 1866, Prussian Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck offered Victor Emmanuel II an alliance with the Kingdom of Prussia in the Austro-Prussian War. In exchange, Prussia would allow Italy to annex Austrian-controlled Venice. King Emmanuel agreed to the alliance, and the Third Italian War of Independence began. The victory against Austria allowed Italy to annex Venice. In 1870, France started the Franco-Prussian War and brought some of its own soldiers in Rome. Italy marched in to take over the Papal State. Italian unification was complete, and the capital was moved from Florence to Rome. World War I. Italy entered the war in 1915 with the aim of completing national unity. For this reason, it is also considered the Fourth Italian War of Independence in a historiographical perspective that identifies in the latter conclusion of the unification of Italy. The war forced the decision whether to honor the alliance with Germany and Austria, but for 6 months, Italy remained neutral as the Triple Alliance was only for defensive purposes. Italy took the initiative in entering the war in spring of 1915, despite strong popular and elite sentiment in favor of neutrality. Italy was a large, poor country whose political system was chaotic. Its finances were heavily strained and its army was very poorly prepared. When the Treaty of London was announced in May 1915, there was an uproar in anti-war elements. Reports from all around Italy showed people feared war and cared little about territorial gains. Pro-war supporters mobbed the streets. In 1918, Benito Mussolini created the Combat League. It was originally dominated by patriotic socialist syndicalist veterans who opposed the pacifist policies of the Italian Socialist Party. This early fascist movement had a platform more inclined to the left, promising social revolution, proportional representation in elections, women's suffrage, and dividing rural private property held by estates. They also differed from later fascism by opposing censorship, militarism, and dictatorship. The 1919 and 1920 period was characterized by mass strikes, worker manifestations, as well as self-management experiments through land and factory occupations. In 1922, Mussolini took advantage of a general strike to announce his demands to the Italian government to give the fascist party political power or face a coup. With no immediate response, a group of 30,000 fascists began a long trek across Italy to Rome, claiming that fascists were intending to restore law and order. The fascists demanded Prime Minister Luigi Facta's resignation and that Mussolini be named to the post. Although the Italian army was far better armed than the fascist militias, the liberal system and King Victor Emmanuel III were facing a deeper political crisis. The king was forced to choose which of the two rival movements in Italy would form the government: Mussolini's fascists or the Marxist Italian Socialist Party. He selected the fascists. By the 1930s, Italy had finished their military campaign on Albania and had a client state already set up. And as war approached in 1939, the fascist regime stepped up an aggressive press against France, claiming that its Italian residents were suffering. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, the beginning of World War II, Mussolini chose to stay non-belligerent, although he declared his support for Hitler. In drawing out war plans, Mussolini and the fascist regime decided that Italy would aim to annex large portions of Africa and the Middle East. Hesitance remained in the king and military commander, Pietro Badoglio, who warned Mussolini that Italy had few tanks, armored vehicles, and aircraft. Italy entered the war on June 10, 1940, fulfilling its obligations towards the Pact of Steel. Mussolini hoped to quickly capture Savoy, Nice, Corsica, and the African colonies of Tunisia and Algeria from the French. But Germany signed an armistice on June 22nd, with Marshal Philippe Pétain establishing Vichy France, that retained control over southern France and colonies. This decision angered the fascist regime. In the summer of 1940, Mussolini ordered the bombing of Mandatory Palestine and the conquest of British Somaliland. In September, he ordered the invasion of Egypt. Despite initial success, Italian forces were soon driven back by the British. Hitler had to intervene with the sending of the Afrika Korps, that was the mainstay in the North African campaign. On October 28th, Mussolini launched an attack on Greece. The Royal Air Force prevented the Italian invasion and allowed Greeks to push the Italians back to Albania. Hitler came to Mussolini's aid, by attacking the Greeks through the Balkans. The Balkans campaign had as a result the dissolution of Yugoslavia and Greece's defeat. Italy gained southern Slovenia, Dalmatia, Montenegro, and established puppet states of Croatia and the Hellenic state. By 1942, it was faltering as its economy failed to adapt to the conditions of the war, and Italian cities were being heavily bombed by the Allies. Also, despite Rommel's advances, the campaign in North Africa began to fail in late 1942. The complete collapse came after the decisive defeat at El Alamein. By 1943, Italy was losing on every front. Half of the Italian forces fighting in the Soviet Union had been destroyed. The African campaign had failed, the Balkans remained unstable, and Italians wanted the end to the war. In July 1943, the Allies successfully invaded Sicily, and in an effort to knock out Italy of the war, established a foothold in Europe. On July 25th, Mussolini was ousted by the Great Council of Fascism and arrested by the order of King Emmanuel III, who appointed General Pietro Badoglio as the new prime minister. Badoglio stripped away the final elements of the fascist rule by banning the National Fascist Party and signed an armistice with the Allied forces. Mussolini was rescued by a German commando in Operation Oak. The Germans brought Mussolini to northern Italy, where he set up a fascist puppet state, the Italian Social Republic, or RSI. Meanwhile, the Allies advanced in southern Italy. By September 1943, Naples rose against the occupying German forces. The Germans, often helped by fascists, committed several atrocities against Italian civilians in occupied zones, such as the Ardentine Massacre and the Sant'Anna di Stazzena Massacre. The Kingdom of Italy declared war on Nazi Germany on the 13th of October 1943. Tensions between the Axis powers and the Italian military were rising following the failure to defend Sicily. On June 4th, the German occupation of Rome came to an end as Allies advanced. The final Allied victory over Axis Italy did not come until the spring of 1945, after Allied troops breached the Gothic Line, leading to the surrender of German and fascist forces in Italy on May 2nd. And to conclude this video, in the present day, Italy stands as a tall nation with rich cultural heritage, a vibrant economy, and profound influence on global arts, fashion, and cuisine. From the timeless beauty of its historic sites like Rome, Florence, and Venice, to the innovation and craftsmanship of its industries, Italy continues to be a beacon of creativity and tradition. Anyways, yeah, thanks for watching.